What's like the nuts and bolts behind a typical day at the Daily Show? Like as far as like you check in the morning and then the show's on air, what are the spaces in between?
Yeah. Well, you punch in, you go to the punch-in clock, you punch in with your time card, then you got to work in the storeroom for a while. But
get the pencils.
Yeah, exactly. Got to get the pencil.
Because how else are the sketches going to be written?
You got to open up all the pencils, all the legal pads. Yeah. The process that I came up with in joke farming is very much informed by the kind of daily process at the Daily Show. And I'm not sure exactly how they do it now because I haven't worked there in years. But when I was there, in the morning, you'd have a morning meeting that was called the morning writers meeting, but it was the producers were in there. John would join. It was not just the writers. And you would talk about what are the stories that John is interested in talking about today. The segment producers would pitch things. The writers would pitch things. And we'd talk about, well, we'd do something about this, or how would we approach this issue? And often those meetings were less about throwing out jokes. You would throw out jokes on them, but it was often more about what are we going to say about this thing? What's our point of view on this topic? You know, there was one day when John when ISIS was rampaging through the Middle East, and John goes, "But how do we stop ISIS?" And in my head, I'm like, I don't know, John. If I knew that, I'd work for the Pentagon, John. I don't think this is the job I'd be doing. But it very much was let's figure out what our understanding of this issue is and what our thought about it is, and then we can build a joke around it. And then that headline story would be split up into assignments that different writers would take, and either working by yourself or working in duos, you would write up, anywhere from 4 to 6 pages of jokes. Depending on the assignment, it might be a section of the headline that is pretty structured out, or it might be just loose jokes. 6 pages is too much. I would often hand in, when I was starting there as a writer, I would hand in 6-page packets because I'd be like, I'm going to blow them away. I'm going to overwhelm them. And then eventually I was like, nobody's reading all these jokes. Like, this is too many.
Yes, that is Elliott Kalan, who was the head writer of The Daily Show, Mystery Science Theater 3000, and author of the new book, Joke Farming. And you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. And on this episode, we are going to do some deep diving into the art of joke writing, particularly talking about Elliott's new book, Joke Farming, which is a must-read for anyone wanting to get in comedy or currently in comedy. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On Wednesday, January 14th, at the McCain Institute in Washington, D.C., I will be doing a demo of my show, AI versus Human Roast Battle, at a big, fancy AI conference in D.C. for people on Capitol Hill and members of Homeland Security. Holy shit, that sounds serious. Apparently, I'm the comic relief. And on Thursday, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's in Park Slope, I'll be presenting my show, That 80s Improv Challenge Special Horror and David Lee Roth Edition. Yes, 3 teams compete by creating scenes based on horror and David Lee Roth videos of the 1980s. We will have a human rapper take on a machine learning AI in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. And this month, our AI contestant is AI profanity-laced Mr. Rogers. And of course, on Friday, January 30th, 7 p.m., at the Red Room above the KGB bar, I'll be presenting my show Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. Also, friends, take some time to like, subscribe, share an episode with a friend, and comment on Comedy History 101. Give us no less than 5 stars on iTunes or Spotify. Every little bit helps. Or on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram, comedyhist 101. And I guess that's it for Instagram. And now, without further ado,
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.
Elliott,
Hello. How are you?
how are you?
All right, thanks.
You're the first person I've talked to on the podcast who not only is a comedy expert, but also a Robert Moses expert.
I'm more of a comedy expert than I am a Robert Moses expert. I'm more of a Robert Moses dilettante, but I feel like I've been able to successfully piggyback off of the greatest ever book about Robert Moses, because one of the greatest books ever written, to like claim a little piece of it for myself in a way that I never thought was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just jump right in. First of all, love the book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When you were a child, what
In
was
some
the
ways, I
first-
still am.
When you were a younger child, when was the first semblance, do you remember, of coming across a joke or telling a joke or hearing a joke?
That's a really good question. I kind of don't. I feel like it goes.
But by the way, thank you.
You're welcome. You know,
I wrote it. I wrote them.
it's a genuinely
Yeah.
good question. Whoever wrote that question for you, you give them a raise
Yeah.
because they're doing a good job. It's a good question because I don't. I feel like it's something that has been a part of my thinking and my feeling, like just humor and comedy, for so long that I kind of don't remember the first one. I remember early things that I liked a lot, or like I remember being able to recognize jokes and things in ways that excited me. I mean, probably the first thing was either an episode, like a Looney Tunes cartoon, or an episode of Muppet Babies or something like that. Something I was watching as a child. But I remember, for instance, like I was a huge Ninja Turtles fan when I was a kid, and I was just the right age for the first cartoon of that. And the episodes that had very specific jokes in them, I was always stuck out to me. And I remember there was one episode where they're driving the turtle van somewhere, and there's dramatic music on the soundtrack. And I think it's Donatello turns the camera, or either Donatello or Michelangelo is like, "Wow, dramatic music," or something like that. Like that music's really dramatic. And I remember as a kid loving the kind of fourth wall breaking mechanics of that. You know,
Brechtian alienation.
exactly.
Yeah,
In a similar way that I had such a very big moment for me was seeing like Gremlins 2 in the theaters, where I loved the first Gremlins, which is funny, but it's a straightforward movie. It exists in a regular movie reality, and Gremlins 2 is like a Looney Tunes cartoon, but with gremlins. And I remember watching that when it was in the theaters, and I was probably about 9 or 10, and just being like, I didn't know you could do these things in a movie. Like the Gremlins broke the film, and they're doing shadow puppets. Like they're in the theater right now with us. Now they're changing what the film is. That was like, it was so exciting to me. So I think I kind of don't remember the first kind of jokes I knew, but I definitely remember the first kind of fourth wall or reality breaking jokes that I saw. But like when I was a kid, I mentioned in my book Joke Farming that like when I was a kid, I used to read joke books just cover to cover as if they were, you know, novels. Like I just start at the beginning and read the whole thing through. And
do you remember any of these like particular joke books? That you've read?
They would
like,
be
when
like,
you were
it
little?
would be like, you know, I don't remember the titles. It would be stuff that would be like crazy monster jokes for kids, that kind of stuff. Where it's like, what was the giant's problem? Like, did you hear the joke about the giant? It would go over your head. What was the mummy's problem? He was too wrapped up in himself. That kind of stuff. Like, and I'd just be like, turning from
Classics
page to
are always
page.
classics.
Yeah.
And then for those not in the know, could you explain the concept of joke farming?
Sure. Someday everyone will know it. It'll be taught in elementary schools, but as of yet, not so much. You know, I've been a professional joke writer in one form or another for close to 20 years now. And I found at a certain point, specifically when I was working for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where I was a writer for a while and the head writer for like a year and a half, that I needed to learn how to write jokes reliably and kind of in a limited amount of time, and to keep my level of quality up. And the way that I think a lot of people start out writing jokes, and I've always loved, like I said, jokes, and I always wanted to write them. The way a lot of people do it is they kind of like wait for inspiration to strike. And the way that we see stand-up comedy specifically portrayed in movies and television, it's a lot of somebody just gets up on stage and they just start talking about their life, and suddenly they're clicking and jokes are popping out of their mouths and the audience loves it.
Yeah, the 1988 Punchline movie with Tom,
With Tom
Hanks
Hanks.
and Sally Fields were talking to you.
Yep, exactly. And in reality, you cannot guarantee that inspiration is going to hit you, right? And especially if you want to be a professional, you need to be able to do it reliably. I feel like the difference between being a funny person and being a professional funny person is being able to do it kind of on command, not just, I think a funny thing. When I'm at a party and I'm talking, I'm so funny and the jokes are flying, but also it's 9:30 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. I've got to write 2 pages worth of jokes or they're not going to pay me. So I've got to, even if I'm not feeling it, I've got to get it done. And so joke farming is a way of building a reliable writing process so that you can identify ideas for jokes, develop premises for them, and then go through the stages of crafting the mechanics and then tweaking and polishing so that by the end of it you get a solid joke. You get a joke that you can be proud of and that someone will hopefully think it's worth it to pay you money for, or at the very least will laugh at. But joke farming is essentially having a writing process so that you don't have to rely on the part of your brain that likes jokes to feel like it wants to work that day, but instead so that you can write jokes when you need to. And a lot of people who are not joke writing professionals may be like, why do I need that? I don't need that. You're going to have to give a speech at a wedding at some point. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to think of jokes about someone you love at some point, and you're going to want to be able to know how to do it,
Yeah, so again, one of my favorite quotes about art is, amateurs need inspiration, professionals turn up for work. Let's just say, you're at the Daily Show or wherever you're working, you're not feeling inspired. What are your technical go-tos when you have to do the job?
Well, I talk about this in the book is exactly that it's basically especially for something like The Daily Show, where you're often working off of a piece of footage. You're working off of a sound bite or a piece of B-roll. But I worked at Mystery Science Theater 3000, and there you're working off of the film. But even the show I'm working on right now it's just a narrative show. And sometimes I need a joke for the scene. Okay, let me take the scene that I'm working within this and figure out treat that like the material I'm working off of. And for myself, this process is, let me identify what's absurd or ridiculous about this soundbite or moment or scene, and just state it for myself in a sentence, just in a straightforward sentence. So it's clear to me, this isn't a funny way to put it, but this is what's strange or weird or rubs me the wrong way about this thing. And then think about, who's the voice of the joke teller for this? Is it myself? Is it a character? Is it the host of the show that I'm writing for? How would they express a similar feeling? How would it hit them? What's their frame of reference? What's their perspective? What's their style and their sensibility? How would they express that absurdity? And then you need kind of like a premise. What's the little story that I'm going to tell that expresses that absurdity in a way that the audience gets it, where I'm giving the audience most of the information they need so that they can then fill in the last piece of information and get it and be a part of literally the cognition of the joke. Because the way I see it with a joke is you want to bring the audience all the way to understanding and let them take the last leap. It's like the way I describe it in the book is, it's like if you said A, B, C, D, F, the audience is going to fill in E, and that's all that's what you want. You don't say, if you say A, B, C, D, F, it's not funny. But if you go A, B, C, D, F and the audience goes E, then that's the funny way. But I mean, the way I said it was not funny. But then it's figuring out what's the little kind of like story about that point that you want to tell. And sometimes it's a matter of, or often for me, it's a matter of me saying, well, what if it was like this? Well, what if instead of doing it like this, it was like this? What if instead of assuming one thing, we assumed this other thing? What if we didn't take this for granted? What if people did the opposite of what we expect them to? And then you're like, okay, great, I've got a little story, a premise that can express the absurdity that this voice has recognized and is expressing. And then it's just a matter of structure, which to me is some of the most fun part of it. In the book, I start with structure because I really enjoy it, but it's literally like making sure the funniest part is at the end, making sure that the audience has all the information it needs and it's being given it to them at the speed they need it. The steps, you're building the staircase that's going to lead them to where they need to jump off, and then after that, it's just fine tuning. Are there too many words in this joke? Is there a more specific word I could use here? Is there a funnier kind of more surprising twist that I could put on the end of it. And then you deliver it to the audience. That's the final part of it. And so it feels like a real complicated, let's just say it, like kind of technical, kind of boring process. But it's a process I built for myself kind of based on, I think, the way that I unconsciously think of jokes when they just pop into my head. And the more I've used it, the faster I can use it. And so my goal is to use this process and get so good at it by just through sheer muscle memory that it no longer feels like a process. And instead it just feels like the way my brain is thinking. And when I was working at the Daily Show, especially during my last time there, when I was rewriting scripts, sometimes I would have less than an hour, some 40 minutes, 50 minutes to rewrite an entire headline script. And it was always the time of day that they served lunch. So I was already distracted. Like I needed time to eat my lunch. And so I really felt like I need this process that I can use to generate jokes so that I'm not spending so much time on each joke that I'm running out of time. And so the description of the process often takes less time than the use of the process. And, I was literally doing this today for something that I was working on where it was coming up with, well, what's a different way for this character to express this point? Me putting it through that process of like, okay, well, what's the absurdity they're trying to get at? What's the specific thing that hits them and their perspective about it? What words would they use? How might maybe they're going about it, in an opposite way instead of hitting it directly, and it works for me. And it means that on the days when I'm like out of juice, when I'm like, I got nothing, I can't think of a single thing, it almost feels like I have this little mental machine that I can feed something in at the front and then go through the steps and the joke comes out at the end, like the everlasting gobstopper machine in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And every time I'm like, oh, it worked. Thank goodness. The machine still functions.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
So you started as an intern. What is that sort of like farm system like with, going on, some inside baseball into working for the Daily Show when you start as an intern? What, for people out there who, are starting in comedy, what are you learning and what are you doing as an intern?
As I'm doing my professional comedy career started it was the fall of 2002, and I was a college intern at the Daily Show with Jon Stewart for my last semester, and you're doing lots of exciting stuff. If they need candy as a prop, you're going to go out and buy that candy. There's a noise outside and they want to know what it is, they're going to send you out to go look at it and then tell them what's making noise outside. It was really they need someone to make copies of documents, you're going to make those copies. Someone's got to arrange the bagels in the bagel basket for the morning meeting. That's the intern's work. And so it was really, the actual work I was doing was, just a way to get into being in that space, and I was already been a fan of that show. I've been watching it since the first episode when Craig Kilborn was hosting. And so I was just excited to be there, and you're just kind of absorbing everything. And at least when I was there, and I think it's still kind of this way, it felt like a real kind of like family show, in that, not the show for families. Children should not really watch that show. But that the people there really cared about each other. They really, watched out for each other. And I was incredibly lucky that early on, they knew I was already doing kind of sketch comedy writing and performing on the side not for money, like not for a lot of money. My old comedy writing performing partner Brock and I, my old writing partner Brock Mahan, we were a duo called the Hypocrites, and we would do the thing where we'd rent out a theater for one night. Everyone we knew would come to see that show, and we'd be like, we made money on this, but we can't do this for another couple months at least, because these people aren't going to come out every week.
All our friends have already seen it.
Yeah,
Wait, just out of curiosity, so you're doing that in New York. What was the space in New York?
There was a space called the Red Room Theater that we used to rent a lot. Eventually, we got in there was a basement theater. There's a real theater that was called the Gene Frankel Theater, and underneath that there was a basement called Juvie Hall that a friend of ours was running, and we used to do a lot of shows in that space, because finally we had a space where we didn't have to pay to rent it, because our friend was running the space, and we could. And then we used to do a lot of performing there. And I'm trying to think what other. The Red Room was the main one that we used to do. We did one sketch once at a late night show at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, but otherwise my performing career at that space was almost non-existent. But so the people there, when I was an intern, they kind of knew. They really got to know me in a way that you wouldn't expect. I think there were people there who took a real quick liking to me. I worked really hard. I had a couple of rules I was coming from a job working at a Barnes & Noble in Manhattan, and I had rules from working at the Barnes & Noble that I took with me about working hard, doing everything, like not getting involved with the office, being pleasant to everybody, dressing a little nicer than
Always
I needed
put the
to.
books back.
Exactly.
neatly.
Well, so you take. I was at the information desk. You take the customer to the shelf. You take the book off the shelf. You put it in the customer's hand. It's that much harder for them to put it back. And that was literally the basics. And I was the only one doing it. And I learned, oh well, if I put in 100%, most people are putting in 50%. So it looks like I'm a dynamo. It looks like I'm putting in 200%. But like at the Daily Show, I got the reputation as people would stop me and they're like, "Are you the intern where when they send you on a run to get something, you actually run to get it?" And I'm like, yeah, that's what it's called, a run. Like, but I was very lucky to have some people there who really mentored me from a very early start.
Other writers, or Jon Stewart, or
well, there was this woman. The most important one of all is this woman, Jen Flans, who was my boss as an intern, and she's been the executive producer of the show for years now, and she's just a wonderful person. And another producer there who's at Kimmel now, still I think, named Rory Albanese, and also strangely enough, like, when I was an intern and then they hired me as a production assistant, I was a production assistant there for a couple of years, where I also answered the phones. I got to do slightly more than I ordered the office supplies when we ran low on office supplies. Like, I got much more time with Jon, just being around him and seeing him and talking to him, than you would have expected. And I think some of that was just the atmosphere of the place, and some of it was, I feel very lucky, and I know I had a leg up because Jon is a Jewish guy from New Jersey. I'm a Jewish guy from New Jersey. Kind of spoke the same language. And so it was not hard for me to put myself in his voice and kind of talk to him. And so it was and there were writers there that helped me out too. Really a lot more people than I can really fairly name. And so I was very lucky to be there and very grateful to be there. It was one of these things where each time I was getting ready to kind of leave, because I felt like I had been a production assistant for too long, or I'd been a segment producer for too long, and I really wanted to be a writer, an opportunity would kind of magically open up. It was almost like the show knew when I was about to go and was like, now you've paid that due. Now we'll open the door to the next step,
What's like the nuts and bolts behind a typical day at the Daily Show? Like, as far as like you check in the morning and then the show's on air, what are the spaces in between?
Yeah. Well, you punch in, you go to the punch-in clock, you punch in with your time card, then
of
you got to
course.
work in the storeroom for a while. But
get the pencils.
Yeah, exactly. Got to get a pencil.
Because how else are the sketches going to be written?
You got to open up all the pencils, all the legal pads. Yeah. The process that I came up with in joke farming is very much informed by the kind of daily process at the Daily Show. And I'm not sure exactly how they do it now because I haven't worked there in years. But when I was there, in the morning, you'd have a morning meeting that was called the morning writers meeting, but it was the producers were in there. Jon would join. It was not just the writers. And you would talk about what are the stories that Jon is interested in talking about today. The segment producers would pitch things. The writers would pitch things. And we'd talk about, well, we'd do something about this, or how would we approach this issue? And often those meetings were less about throwing out jokes. You would throw out jokes on them, but it was often more about, what are we going to say about this thing? What's our point of view on this topic? There was one day when Jon when ISIS was rampaging through the Middle East, and Jon goes, but how do we stop ISIS? And in my head, I'm like, I don't know, Jon. If I knew that, I'd work for the Pentagon, Jon. I don't think this is the job I'd be doing. But it very much was let's figure out what our understanding of this issue is and what our thought about it is, and then we can build a joke around it. And then that headline story would be split up into assignments that different writers would take, and either working by yourself or working in duos, you would write up, anywhere from 4 to 6 pages of jokes. Depending on the assignment, it might be a section of the headline that is pretty structured out, or it might be just loose jokes. 6 pages is too much. I would often hand in, when I was starting there as a writer, I would hand in 6-page packets because I'd be like, I'm going to blow them away. I'm going to overwhelm them. And then eventually I was like, nobody's reading all these jokes. Like, this is too many. And those scripts.
It's the Barnes and Noble thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, I gotta show them I can do more than anybody else. And it was like, well, more is not as good as best. The one great joke is better than 10, kind of not so good jokes. And then those scripts would be read by Jon and the executive producers and the head writer. And Jon would choose the jokes that he liked. We would restructure the headline. He would kind of talk out, here's the outline I want for this headline now. You'd call the writers back in, and you'd assign out, you take this part of it, you take this part of it, you take this part of it, and they do their second pass. And then those scripts would come in, you'd have another reading session, and Jon would again pick some jokes. He'd say, don't do this, do this. Actually, here's how I want to restructure it. I want it like this, this, and this. And then the head writer and one of the executive producers would take that and do a rewrite of it, which would then go to rehearsal. And then Jon would rehearse it. And then after rehearsal, you'd have a final writing session, which was the executive producers and the head writer and Jon and our script supervisor and like maybe one or two other people in a very small room. And Jon would essentially dictate out the final script based on how he felt things were going in rehearsal, how his thoughts had changed throughout the day, kind of like what jokes he was feeling and what he wasn't feeling. And part of my job when I was in those writing sessions was just kind of like look for opportunities to throw in a joke that would fit Jon's voice, but maybe he wasn't thinking of in the moment. And I remember there was some bit we did that involved it was like, I don't remember, somehow it involved a landfill that was full of radioactive material and used condoms. And I remember saying to Jon, I'm like, we don't have to take this opportunity, but we do have an opportunity here to do a joke about a 40-foot mutant sperm. And Jon goes, you know what? I think I'd like to take that opportunity. And so it was a lot of not getting in his way, but trying to, all throughout the day, think to myself, my real audience for what I'm writing is Jon. I want him to be satisfied with the show. I want it to be representing what he's feeling, what he's thinking about this, and something he thinks is funny. And so I want to assist him in getting those thoughts to the audience in as funny a way as possible. And on that show, it was very much, he was the start and the end of all things, and very much the generator of what we were going to be doing on the show. And my success was often in, how can I write a joke that is the kind of joke Jon would tell if he knew the one piece of information in my head that maybe he doesn't have. You know, like, he may not know this thing about Abraham Lincoln's son or the plot of Predator 2, but these are jokes that conceivably he could tell and they would fit his voice, you know. So that's what a day was like, and what my kind of goal during that day was. And if I got one joke on the show that night, I'd be like, I did it. This is great, perfect. And I kept a list of all of them.
What was it like when you got your first joke on the air, like hearing it like first time?
You know what?
Do you remember that joke?
I don't remember, because I'm sure I got jokes on the show before I was a credited writer, just from being either segment producer, throwing lines out or things like that. The jokes that I remember best are the ones where they either came to me quickly and I was excited that they lasted through the whole day and came out, or the ones that took a lot of work and I was able to finally work them out. But then there's the ones where there was stuff that would come up, you know, organically, where there's something one year, like, it was like John Edwards was giving a speech about Hillary Clinton, and he said something about how she has a spine of steel or something like that. And the joke that they were looking at was like, oh my God, she's Wolverine. And Jon called me, I think I was still a segment producer, and he was like, does Wolverine have a steel skeleton? And I'm like, no, it's an adamantium skeleton, Jon. It's not the same thing. And he's like, and so they wrote me in correcting the joke in person rather than change the joke. And like, those were the most fun things, where it was like, oh, I guess I kind of wrote this part for myself, but it was just by addressing the question that they had, you know.
It easier writing for yourself? You know, I know you did stand-up comedy for a while, or having the, you know, constraint of you're writing for Jon Stewart, you already know that kind of structure. Is that easier?
At the time, I definitely found it easier to write for Jon. I think because his voice was so fully formed, you know, his perspective and how he expressed himself, and I'd been absorbing that since I was a kid, you know, watching him. I mean, I remember watching him on You Wrote It, You Watch It on MTV and things like that. And so I kind of felt like I understood that voice. Whereas when I started doing stand-up, at least, and I talked about this in the book, in my voice chapter, I had to figure out what my voice was. I had to figure out who I was and how I expressed myself. And that took time. It took time for me to figure out, you know, what is the funny part of myself that I can use to filter things through to express things the way I would normally express them. And that took a lot of time. So now I think it would probably still be easier to write for Jon. But I was working on something for myself earlier today, like a presentation that I'm going to perform at a live show for my podcast, The Flophouse. And I was finding
at probably SF Sketchfest.
At SF Sketchfest, yep, at Cobb's Comedy Club.
There we go. Yep.
January 25th, Sunday.
I'm from San Francisco originally, so
we'll be there for San Francisco Sketchfest Sunday, January 25th.
Yeah.
And I was finding that I was having to ask myself a little bit, how would I say this? How would I make this point in a way that sounds like me and doesn't sound like I am imitating someone else's voice? You know, because when I was starting as a stand-up, I would tell the kinds of jokes sometimes that I thought I was supposed to be telling, but not really the jokes that fit my voice, and it wasn't quite working. It didn't feel natural, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big thing of like finding your voice and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, so just one last Daily Show question is like, when you're dealing with like very heavy political things in the news, you know, such as what we're dealing with, you know, currently,
Oh, yeah.
how do you you have to address it, but how do you go about also being a comedy show, delivering those two things?
I think it's going through the process, you know, knowing that you have a production and a writing process to fall back on, so that you can digest your emotions through it. There was one of the hardest times for us was the day after the Charlie Hebdo shooting, which was a terrorist attack on a French humor magazine, and it was devastating. It was just really horrible. The same way that the recent news in our country has been devastating, you know. And I think it helped that we were like, we have a process that we go through to produce a show, so let's just try to work through that process as best as we can and trust that we will find the way to make it funny. And so I think it helps it's hard to look at something horrible and be like, all right, got to make a joke about it. Instead, you know, you want to have kind of techniques or tools, and often it's finding a metaphor for that thing, you know, looking at it symbolically, trying to take some distance between and put into a different perspective. And so it's having kind of a skill set. I was about to say a school set, but I meant skill set and tool set that you can apply to it, because it's the same way that it's like, it's hard to say, okay, now I'm going to write a joke, and then you just kind of stare into space and you don't have a thing to work off of. It's hard to have something horrible and just be like, okay, now what am I going to say that's funny about it? It's, you know, having to take the time to think about, what does it mean to me and how do I express that, you know, and having faith that you'll be able to find the funny aspect of it. But even if it is usually looking at it in a sideways way, you know, not coming at it.
What do you mean by sideways way? Just
well, for instance, in
clarify.
that with that Charlie Hebdo shooting, someone on staff, one of the segment producers, I can't remember, found a story about how there are cows in Europe right now that are the descendants of a Nazi cattle breeding program where they were trying to breed super cows, and their descendants are still around. We still have these cows that have the cows themselves are not Nazis, but they still have this kind of uber cow strain. And that we were able to use that as a metaphor for how kind of extremism and hatred, it's harder to get rid of it. It like there's that how it can last for a long time, even in places you didn't expect. And it's something that can stay for a long time. And it was much easier to make jokes about that scenario and using it as an example of a larger point than it was to make jokes about, you know, the terrible thing that happened. And so or looking at people's responses to something. Like, for instance, if I was working the Daily Show and we were talking about what just happened recently with the ICE shooting a woman in Minneapolis, it would be a story about how is the government handling this? How are they lying about it? Rather than jokes about the incident itself, which is so horrifying. You know, and I'm sure there's somebody who's like a real edgy political comic who is like going to go at the event itself and would think it's pussyfooting around to not do it. But part of being a comedy person is feeling comfortable with the work you're doing. And that means that you have to be morally honest with yourself about what are you comfortable doing and what are you not comfortable doing. And it's okay to have a line that you're not going to cross. There's that George Carlin quote about like a comedy is finding where the line is and crossing it deliberately and making people glad that I taking the audience with me and making them glad that I did, or something like that. And I'm the millionth person to say this, but too often people just do the first part of that quote that's just about crossing a line deliberately and not the part about taking the audience with you, which means having a sensitivity to the audience's morality, the audience's sensitivities and palatability. And that means having a sensitivity to that in yourself too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that goes with, you know, what you said about, you know, the give and play with the audience as the receiver and being aware of your audience and not, you know, neglecting them in the formula, which we often see in comedy is like, remember that the audience is part of the formula.
That the audience is, you hear so much where it's like, I killed him. Oh, I hate those audiences. The audiences are idiots. They didn't get it.
I'm edgy.
Yeah, I'm edgy.
They just didn't get it.
Exactly. When I walked on, I don't want the audience. I don't want the audience to get it because it shows that I'm ahead of them. And it's like, I don't know about you, but the reason I got into comedy is because I like hearing laughter. I like feeling people laughing.
I hear that like Dana Gould and him talking about it on his podcast is like someone when he was young just said, remember, you're doing it for the audience.
Yeah.
And that always like stuck with him.
And it shows you like Dana Gould is such an individual voice. He's such a great example of, he's a unique voice. He does jokes that he thinks are funny. He's not going to do material that he knows an audience will laugh at, but he doesn't like, but he still wants the audience to laugh at the material. So he's going to find that meeting ground.
At the end of the day, it's for them. It's, it's for you, but it's also for them.
I mean,
because they paid the ticket.
Well, exactly. They paid the ticket and they want to enjoy themselves. They want to laugh. I think it was a big thing for me. I had horrible stage fright when I was young. And the idea of public speaking was very terrible to me. Now I feel more comfortable speaking in public than I do to another human being. But the public speaking was really scary to me because I had this image in my head, or this feeling that audiences wanted to see me fail. And it took me a long time to realize, like, no, they want to have a good time. They want you to succeed. They want to laugh. If you're succeeding, they're enjoying it. And so they work with them, and
oh my God.
It was
like
it was
that anxiety is like with like, say I'm at Edinburgh Festival or whatever, like during the day of an audience to go, oh, they're just going to hate me. It's like, no, they haven't even shown up yet. Why am I putting myself already out of the equation?
Yeah. Why are you're counting yourself out when, they're not even there. And also if they're showing up, it's because they want to be there.
Yeah.
There was the podcast I've been doing for years and years, the Flophouse. We did a live show once in Washington, D.C. And the people running the theater that we were performing at, they were like, you got a good crowd. A lot of people walked in today. And it was like, and then afterwards we came off the stage and they were like, they really liked that. And it was like, yeah, well, that's why they came. They already know what they're getting. Like they wanted what they knew they were going to get. And I think I feel like, there's some people get into comedy, I guess, like to be mean, because it lets them be mean. But I think most people get into comedy because there's a desperate need inside of them for the approval of other people, and laughter is the way they show that approval with comedy. So you want to get it. And if that means finding a way to meet with the audience between you and them, or a way of nudging the audience just far enough that they're having a good time, feeling uncomfortable, but not so far that they're mad at you, then, that's the job. And to do that, you have to know the audience, and you have to admit that, like, they're part of the process. In the book, I get very pretentious. And I talk about one of the greatest modern artists and greatest prop comics of all time, Marcel Duchamp. He wrote an essay about kind of the role of the spectator in the creative act. And he basically says the artist makes something and he is trying to get close to what's in his head, and he fails. And it is the audience's job to then fill in what is missing and to decide the worth and the meaning of this piece of art. And that art doesn't exist without an observer, without an audience to look at it. And it's the same with comedy. Like, if you tell a joke and there's nobody in the room, then if you laughed at it, you're the audience. But if you didn't laugh at it, then it failed. There's no audience and it doesn't exist. The only reason to do it is to deliver it to an audience and get their reaction, and hope that the most beautiful moment is the moment after you've said the joke, but before they've laughed at it, where you're like, I hope they like this. And it's like going over the hill on a roller coaster, and then when they laugh, it's like the moment when you get to the bottom of the roller coaster and you're like, oh, I'm still alive. I didn't die. That's the thrill of doing it,
Also, you mentioned in your book of like, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but you got to kill your puppies for the sake of the greater good.
Yeah.
Which is, you got to kill maybe a laugh line, like say if you're writing for, Mystery Science Theater or Daily Show, that doesn't service the story. So my question to you, what puppy have you killed that you wish you didn't have to, but you realize didn't serve the story?
I had a script I was working on recently that for a show that hasn't come out yet. So I can't talk about that one, but it was exactly the thing where it's like, there was a back and forth between two characters. You know what it was? I'll just describe it. Two characters are about to go on like an undercover mission. And one of them says, we'll go over there. By the way, our couple name is this. And he says something where his the first half of his name is attached to the back half of the other person's name. And the other person goes, no, it's the opposite, and you know it. And they say the first half of their name in the back of the other name. And it was just something that was supposed to show these characters are being playful with each other. And I really thought the description is not funny, but I really enjoyed it. But at a certain point I was like, I got to get this script down to like 28 pages. And this back and forth is totally unnecessary. It doesn't build anything. It doesn't contribute to anything, except I think it's funny. So I'll just put that in my back pocket for some other day, but I'll have to cut it from here. With Mystery Science Theater, the first season, we got the note afterwards from the audience that we just put too many jokes in it. There was too many jokes. They were crammed too close together, so people couldn't process them. So in the second season, it was like, this is a funny joke. Cut it. It's too close to this other one. This is a funny joke. Get rid of it. It's too, because we need that space between jokes because, again, it's for the audience. It's not for you to show off how many jokes you can produce. It's for the audience to enjoy what's there. And you look at like the great comedy shows and movies, and often so much of the humor of it is not just in the joke itself, but in the time after the joke that lets you sit in it and really take it in. Now I sound like an old man, but which I am, but the Jack Benny joke that everyone always talks about with Jack Benny, where the robber says, your money or your life? And he is famously stingy, so he just pauses for a long time. And the robber goes, well, your money or your life? And he goes, I'm thinking. And it only works if there's that pause for a little while before he says anything. And the joke, and then if the robber started yelling at him right afterwards, then the I'm thinking joke would not land the right way. And so it's making it easy as you can for the audience to laugh at your joke, because you want to challenge them. If you're challenging them, you want to challenge them with the subject matter. You want to challenge them with the idea that you're putting into their head. You don't want to challenge them with the structure necessarily, because you want them to be able to understand what you're saying to them rather than have to puzzle through what's going on. Now, there are differences. I remember the first time I ever saw Reggie Watts perform, and I was like, what is this? I have no idea what he's doing, but I thought it was really funny. I really enjoyed it. So if your thing is that nobody understands what you're doing, that's different. If that's the bit, but otherwise you don't want the audience walking away from a joke being like, what was that about? Like, what was he saying? I don't understand. You want them walking away laughing and being like, I can't believe he said that, or I agree with that, or I don't agree with that, but that was funny, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I just one little slight thing of that. How do you explain, say, Norm Macdonald?
So that's
when he's writing with Jim Downey, and he wouldn't care if the audience got it or not, but in retrospect, you would look, he would have his gem jokes that he would do no matter what, with the 10-second pause, just looking at the camera, and it wouldn't get a laugh, but he would just say, no, this, and Jim Downey would say, no, this has to stay in.
I think the difference there is that like every now and then you have a comedian who is ahead of the audience in a way that is undeniable. And I think that Norm Macdonald is very much like that. But also Norm Macdonald stuff, I think there it was a matter of I think when they're saying no, it has to stay in, they're saying we know there's an audience for this. It's just not this audience,
Or it might not be until 20 years from now.
Yes, exactly.
And then we watch it on YouTube endlessly.
Well, it's like the bit he did at the Bob Saget roast where he's just saying the hackiest dumb jokes. And I feel like that everyone agrees now that's hilarious. But it's the kind of thing that it takes the time maybe to understand what's going on in it, or I don't know. The funny thing is though that like Norm Macdonald, he would do that stuff, but he's still like a super successful comedian. He was still, audiences laugh at him, and he's so funny. And you see that there's that video of him telling the moth joke on Conan O'Brien, where he goes on forever, and the punchline is terrible, and half the joke is Conan being like, how much longer does this go? But the audience is loving it. It's so funny. And I think it's the opposite, not the opposite. I think this is the corollary to you need to have the audience in mind. Is the first audience is you. If you don't think it's funny, why bother telling it? If you're not laughing at the joke you're telling, why bother? Why should anyone else laugh? I quote in the book, kind of not the way he meant it. Is it Maimonides, I think, who says, if I'm not for me, who will be? And I feel like it's the same with comedy. If I don't think this joke is funny, then why should I even put it out? And so your first audience is that you have to satisfy is you. And with Norm Macdonald, it felt like he was always satisfying that audience, and he knew or had faith there was another audience out there that was also going to enjoy it. And sometimes that audience was just me, as seen with the Norm Macdonald Sports Show, which I thought was one of the funniest shows in the world, but it lasted, I think, 5 episodes or something like that, or 7 episodes. And other times things line up. He was also, I think some of his stuff was repetition over long periods of time. So when he was on Weekend Update, when he said the first couple times he said a joke and he said, you know why? Frank Stallone. There would be very little laughter. But once you know, oh, he does this. This is the thing he goes to over and over again. And on his sports show, he had a thing where it was like the world of sports. And he would show the same clips in the same order and tell the same jokes about them each episode. And it's like the more he does it, the funnier it gets. But it takes a couple times for you to be like, oh, I get it. He's doing the exact same thing every time on purpose, you know?
But he also had the genius of having a setup also be the same punchline. Same wording.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a thing that I read once from him. There was an article about him where it quoted him telling a younger comic, don't be afraid to just say it clearly or something like that. Like, don't be afraid to just say it plainly. And I feel like that to me is saying he is thinking about the audience. Even if he wants to push them with the idea of like, you might not know this is a joke, what I'm doing right now, but it is a joke, but I want you to know what it is. So you can, if you're confused, it's because you're like, I didn't know that could be a joke, not I don't know what he's doing. And so I think anytime you are looking for clarity, you're thinking about the audience because you want the audience to understand it, you know, even if what you want the audience is, even if you can't control the audience's reaction to it, you know. But you're right. He's also sometimes someone's just a genius. Every now and then someone's a genius. And there's a bit he did on his podcast that I think about so often where he is learning in real time who Adolf Hitler was by going through his Wikipedia entry. And he's like, oh, look at that. He's veteran of the Great War. Okay. He's looking at his pictures like, oh, look at those eyes, piercing eyes, you know, something intense about them. Like, oh, he's a noted orator. He goes, this I don't like. Oh, hated Jews. I don't like that. That I don't like. And then he goes, you know what we should do? The guy's like, you know, we should go and kill him. And this guy goes, oh, he's dead. And he goes, oh, I didn't even know he's sick. And it's so funny to me that like he's the idea of him learning in real time who this person is with the most sincere feeling, kind of like straightforward reaction. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, I don't like that. And then it all leads up to the dumbest kind of like dumbest joke. I find it so beautiful. It's so funny.
Yeah. I mean, we could go on about Norm Macdonald. Germany, World War One. They took on who they went to war against? The world. Then they had a few years later. Who they went against? The world again. But yeah, Andy Kaufman, another one against the prototype of just straight joke, whatever. But you know, again. Like, I think there's a misnomer that he didn't care about the audience, but he did. There's actually a video on YouTube. I think he was in the Catskills and he just bombed. And he was, like, his friend videotaped him backstage and he was devastated that he just had a horrible show, that no one bought into it.
I think that's because there's a misunderstanding. I think that he was like pulling a big prank on the audience. And maybe he was to a certain extent, but with the intended effect of, when the audience understands the prank, they're going to laugh at it. Like, he still wants nobody goes into, or he didn't go into comedy, I think, wanting to make people upset. Like, he wants them to laugh, and there it's the disconnect.
No, he wants that thing. He wants them to join his journey.
Yes.
He wants them to get on the bus and have the milk and cookies.
and there's the disconnect of, oh, I think this thing is really funny, but they don't. And you know, he died so young, and I'm curious to see. I wish we could have seen what he would have developed further, especially as more and more people kind of got his thing. I mean, every comic has a bad night every now and then, but I feel like when you read about him, it's like nobody understood him. He baffled people. He you know, they didn't get him at all. But when you watch his performances, like, there's people laughing at it. But there, I think it really is, like him being like, "Come with me. This is funny, right?" And crashing against the reality, unfortunately, that not everybody has the same sense of humor. You know, he would be, if he was around now, I think he would be like one of these guys who he'd probably have a show on a streamer or something like that. I don't know. And they do
hard to say
pranks and stuff, or maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, again, he was like really into wrestling, so I think, you know, a lot of his things was based upon wrestling of, you know, the heel and the baby face. You know, try to get the audience, you know, for him to come, you know, be the villain. Well, that's the audience to boo. You know,
it's interesting. It's like he is a that is one of those times where you can genuinely say ahead of his time, because he was expecting a level of ironic understanding on the audience's part and a level of genre understanding on the audience's part that they didn't have then, but they would have had now. In a world where we're as steeped in that kind of like fake narrative culture. I mean, now we essentially have a monster president who also lives by professional wrestling rules. When Andy Kaufman was doing, especially his wrestling bits, when he was being the heel and he was wrestling women and just being a jerk, like the lack of understanding on the part of the audience of what he was trying to mimic, or that his whole thing was, okay, I'm the heel from a professional wrestling match, but instead of wrestling a huge guy, I'm just wrestling women from the audience,
or I'm from Hollywood.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like they didn't get like, oh, someone famous is actually being the heel.
Yeah, and I think it's every joke has to play off of, if it's going to be successful, has to play off of a shared kind of like understanding of reality, a shared assumption. And in those cases, I think his assumptions and the audience's assumptions were just not together enough. They just weren't close enough, Yeah,
they didn't get it. Like when he's wrestling Jerry Lawler, that he's being the villain.
Yeah.
They really wanted to kill him.
Well, it's kind of like lately I've been seeing videos from when Charles Grodin would go on The Tonight Show, and he would deliberately go on and be like prickly and really really hostile to Johnny Carson. And you can tell that Johnny Carson finds it very funny, but I think it kind of confuses people a little bit because they don't know he's putting on an act, And it's hard to do that kind of. It was harder to do that kind of comedy back then when there was a assumption of sincerity, or at least a lack of knowledge of how fake those interactions are. Whereas now I feel like you can get away with it. Actually, now it's gone around the bend too far, where even if someone is genuinely being negative and hostile, people go like, it's just a joke, right? It's just a joke. It's like, no, he's a terrible person. Nah, it's all joking. It's all joking, Back then it would be like, it's all a joke, right? No, he's terrible. I saw it on television. He was mean to Johnny Carson.
Yeah, there's only 3 networks and 3 shows on at any given time. So why would someone do that on one of the 3 shows that are on the 3
especially
networks?
Because the audience is like, a Johnny Carson audience at the time is like, I'm getting ready for bed. I'm tired. I just want to have a pleasant ease into the night. Why is this man being mean when I'm just trying to enjoy myself? So yeah, it's a different world then. If only we could go into a time machine and and experience it for ourselves, but too late.
Yeah. And just a couple last questions here,
Sure.
just to wrap up. Who would be on your joke writing Mount Rushmore?
Oh, that's a good question.
I mean, like, if that would be a plausible thing.
There's so many great joke writers, and
also just the people that stand the test of time.
I mean, like, to me, like, Stephen Wright is one of the greatest, joke writers of all time, and his jokes are so precise and they're so kind of like tooled. Setting aside anything about his personal life, Woody Allen is, one of the great kind of like, again, technically so technically precise and so funny. Let's see. I want to say Mel Brooks, but he's funnier as an improv performer, I think, than as a writing performer. But then you've got guys like, I'm a huge fan of Robert Benchley, the writer from the 30s and 40s, and he is I read his prose essays, and his throwaway phrases and his throwaway sentences are so funny to me. And it feels like someone is talking to you and just kind of being like, well, then there's this thing too. Don't worry about it. And like, it's such a, I think the thing that I'm trying to think of a 4th person since it's a Mount Rushmore, but the thing that and Jack Handy. I think Jack Handy would probably be the last one, who, an SNL writer for years, and he's the only person who writes Shouts and Murmurs essays for The New Yorker that are consistently funny. And another person where I think for me personally, what I admire so much and I'm attracted to in joke writing is precision joke writing, where it's like, oh, you can't take a word out of place in this joke. Like each joke is, and this sentence started in one place and it ended in a different place. And so and the joke is so quick and sustained and clear. And I find that just really, it's something I'm aiming for all the time and failing at much of the time. But I think those are, I feel like when I'm reading like prose humor, there's no one makes me laugh as much as Jack Handy and Robert Benchley, and those are the people that, when it comes to that type of like you're reading writing. That's the thing. My honorable mention would be the British writer Douglas Adams, who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, but that book is like a religious book to me. It's like I find it so funny, but at the same time, I'm like, am I laughing because it's speaking to me, or am I laughing because this joke is written properly? So that's why I'm making him an honorable mention. And I apologize that those are all white guys. They're not all Jewish though. I could have made them all Jewish, and instead I had some diversity in having Robert Benchley on there.
Where do you see joke writing going, and who contemporary is kind of killing it these days?
I wish that I was more plugged into what's going on these days. I feel like the problem with being a professional is that you're so busy doing your own work when you're working, and I'm lucky to be working right now, that I don't have the time to like see what's going on. And there's so much comedy right now. I felt when I was a kid in the 80s and early 90s, like there was so much. I thought, oh, there's so much stand-up comedy on TV. VH1 has a stand-up comedy show. MTV has a stand-up comedy show. There's comedy on Fox sometimes, but now you can't avoid comedy. It's in so many different places, and it's all over the place, and it makes it very hard to kind of wrap your mind around it. I think that if there's a comedian or comedy person right now who I'm really admiring the most, it's probably Atsuka Okatsuka, who I think is such a funny stand-up, and I think her jokes are so funny and feel so specific. They're the jokes that come from her, they feel like, but also like she's been around for a while. But Maria Bamford is always, anytime she has new material, I'm always like, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be great, And so I think those are the two comics that I think the most, I get the most excited when I know that I'm going to get to see material from them, and the stuff they write I think is just so funny. But there's so much good comedy going on. There's just too much to enjoy, which is exciting in a way. And unfortunately, where I see comedy going and comedy writing is, I think there's going to be more and more of it as it's easier and easier to kind of like put out a podcast or, go on TikTok or whatever the next medium is after TikTok. But unfortunately, I also see it being less and less well paid as time goes on. Not that it was ever incredibly well paid, but I feel like there was this period in like maybe the 80s and the 90s when you could be a comedy writer and make a lot of money. And I feel like that has been, I was like leaving college being like, oh boy. And then as soon as I got out of college, they were like, close the window. And we're like, you can work in comedy, but you're not going to make that much. And I think,
tell me about like being a featured journalist. Writer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately it's going to be, I think you're going to see a lot of, there's more and more people who are, the more different types of people doing comedy, the easier it is for them to reach an audience, the more exciting it's going to be, because you're just going to be exposed to jokes that you wouldn't have heard or you wouldn't have thought of. And ideally, more and more people will then have a chance to find comedy that pushes their understanding of what comedy is a little bit, or gives them jokes that they're not familiar with already. I'm hoping that the future of comedy includes less arguing about what is comedy, complaining about not being able to use words that are not okay to use anymore, and also
again, that's just like bad joke writing.
Well, yeah, it's
not complaining about it. We'll just write a really good joke in your complaint. How about that?
They can't. When they say they're like, oh, you can't use this word anymore. It's like, oh, well, they're saying you can't use a crutch anymore. Good, because your leg's not broken, right? So you shouldn't need a crutch. It's like someone who can walk, getting in a wheelchair and being like, I'm too lazy, I'll just wheel myself over there. And it's like, just don't use that word. Just like use your brain to think of a better joke. When people are like, they couldn't make Blazing Saddles nowadays. And it's like, they don't have to. It got made. We have it. Do something different. Do something up for now. And I hope that I hope comedy gets used less in the future to disguise fascism and fascistic thinking. But all I can do is keep writing the jokes that I hope will connect with an audience and give them. We live in tough times. It's always tough times. There's never been a time in history where things were not tough in one way or another. But I go back and forth between, is my job to write something that helps make a point, or is my job to write something that gives people a moment of enjoyment so that they can get through this veil of tears that is life? And it's kind of both. As a comedy writer, it's kind of both, and you get to do both, and you can choose which one you're going to do at which time, and that's exciting. There's so many things you can do with jokes as long as you're making somebody laugh with them.
Well put. And with that, where can people find the book?
The book is called Joke Farming: How to Write Comedy and Other Nonsense. It's available It should be available anywhere where books are sold. You can definitely get it online from the larger book buying retailers, but my preference would be go to your local independent bookstore. If they don't have it on the shelf, ask them to order it from the University of Chicago Press. You'll have to wait a little bit longer, but it'll be worth it. I promise. It's a really fun book. But just say, do you have Joke Farming by Elliott Kalan? If they say no, say, can you order it for me? And it's anyone you know who likes jokes. Maybe they don't like jokes. Hopefully they'll enjoy it. The hope is that if you want to be a joke writer, this will help you to understand how to get better. If you're just interested in comedy, this will help you understand how a joke works. And if you just want to read something funny, hopefully you'll enjoy it too, because there's a lot of jokes in it. I had to make it funny because I don't know how to turn it off. So,
Elliott, thank you so much. It was really great talking to you. I really enjoyed the book.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad you did.
And that wraps up today's episode with Elliott Kalan. I'm going to come right out and say it. A lot of cool stuff about the art of joke writing. And the few quick plugs. Wednesday, January 14th at the McCain Institute in DC, AI versus Human Roast Battle. January 15th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's, That 80s Improv Challenge, Horror and David Lee Roth Edition. January 29th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater, once again, AI versus Human Roast Battle. And of course, on January 30th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room above the KGB bar, Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, HarmonLeon.com, or on the social medias at Harmon Leon. And remember, like, subscribe, and comment on Comedy History 101. Give us no less than 5 stars on iTunes or Spotify, or on our site, comedyhistory101.com, and Instagram at comedyhist101. And if you comment, we will read your comments right here on the podcast, such as this comment from Tom McFeet on the history of National Lampoon's Lemmings. Tom writes, did this show ever play in Toronto? I remember seeing it, but I can't remember where in Toronto. To answer your question, Tom, no, National Lampoon's Lemmings never played in Toronto. It played at the Village Gate in the Lower East Side of New York. And we also got a comment on the history of dead baby jokes. A listener writes, I find it fascinating how historical events can influence humor. Well, thank you very much, listeners. And if you have a comment, once again, we will read that comment right here on the podcast. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Excuse me.
Comedy History 101.